tell you a little bit about my book, This America of Ours, Bernard and Avis DeVoto, the forgotten fight to save the wild. So I use the word forgotten. By a show of hands, I'm curious how many people here are familiar at all with Bernard DeVoto? Oh, that's fabulous. I'm psyched to learn that. What about his wife, Avis, who's a little bit more prominent in pop culture right now? Any Avis DeVoto? Okay, we have some Avis DeVoto fans. It is very appropriate that the Devotos there are so many devotees here because this is kind of a spiritual home. This part of Western Montana is kind of a spiritual home for the Devotos. If you drive over Lolo Pass, you go right by the DeVoto Memorial Cedar Grove. So with the short amount of time allotted me, I will tell you a little bit about why the Devotos are so honored on public lands for the role they played in saving our public lands. This is the Devotos on their honeymoon, 1923. Avis is from the northern peninsula of Michigan, home of a lot of fine Montana conservationists. Now, Bernard is from Ogden, Utah. They met at Northwestern University. They bonded over their love of books. They wanted to create books. Avis as a genius editor, Bernard as a prolific writer. By the 1930s, they were finding success. They were at work on a trilogy of American Western history that would win a Pulitzer Prize and a National Book Award. Bernard was also a very fine columnist and cultural critic. Harper's Magazine hired him in 1935 to write a monthly column. By the 1940s, the Devotos were settled in Cambridge, Massachusetts with their 2 sons, and Bernard was planning a trip of a lifetime to take his family on the Lewis and Clark Trail all the way to the Pacific Ocean, visiting national parks so that he could write about public lands conservation. And that route put him on a collision course with the Devoto's great nemesis, Nevada Senator Pat McCarran. We were talking about origin myths. Pat McCarran's contribution to public lands was attacking public lands. He spent the 1930s defunding an agency that Franklin Roosevelt started called the Grazing Service. The Grazing Service was created to fight the Dust Bowl. Pat McCarran fought the Grazing Service not only by defunding it, but by dismissing the plurality of its supporters. These were small ranchers, hikers, Native Americans, hunters, anglers, municipal water suppliers, irrigation farmers. By the 1940s, Pat McCarran was calling them disloyal to America, possibly communists. In the 1950s, that ideology was picked up on by McCarran's great friend and ally, Joe McCarthy, who saw Pat McCarran as an American hero and a role model. You don't get McCarthyism without its true architect, Pat McCarran. 1946, Pat McCarran has so defunded the Grazing Service that it is reorganized into the agency we know now as the Bureau of Land Management, which Ed Abbey would soon deride as the Bureau of Livestock and Mining, which is exactly what McCarran wanted. So, 1946, the Devotos pile in their Buick and they head west. And they're having a fantastic time learning their history, seeing their public lands, but they start to think something bad is happening when they reach the Dakotas and they see the beginnings of the Garrison Dam. The Garrison Dam is going to flood out around 150,000 acres of the homelands of Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara nations. The Devotos thought that this type of Native American dispossession was a thing of the past, of the 1800s. They are outraged to see that it is still happening in the mid-1900s, and they know from history that the biggest public lands scams, the biggest public lands frauds went hand in hand with these natural resource bonanzas, these boom times in the West. So they start to think maybe something else is being cooked up, and it's in the Range Riders Cafe in Miles City, Montana. Bernard DeVoto eavesdrops on a, quote, very loud and very drunk cattleman. He gets his confirmation that yes, there is an attack coming on public lands, that the same methods that Pat McCarran used against the Grazing Service are now going to be used against the National Forest Service and the National Park Service. So the Devotos transform into investigative journalists, and they start networking their way across the West. In Great Falls, Montana, they meet with Joseph Kinsey Howard, who's in the Montana Journalism Hall of Fame. His portrait hangs on the J School wall over at UM. And in Yosemite, they meet with Ansel Adams. They ask, do you know anything about this plot? The Devotos think if they can get the exact details of this plot, they can expose it and they can stop it. They meet with their old friend Wallace Stegner. But it is in DeVoto's hometown of Ogden, Utah, that they get their big break. They meet with Chet Olson, a Forest Service ranger. And Chet Olson knows about a secret meeting that McCarran is going to preside over. At that meeting, there is produced a transcript of the whole meeting. Everything in this plot is laid out in this transcript. Olson manages to get his hands on one, and he gives it to Bernard DeVoto. What DeVoto reads sets his stubby hair on fire. The plan is this: to take every acre under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management, transfer it to states, and sell it off, around 150 million acres. And then to go into the national forests and to liquidate as many as 75% of the acres inside national forests, and then repeat the process inside national parks and monuments. DeVoto calls it a land grab, the biggest in U.S. history, and he blows it up, he exposes it in the January 1947 issue of Harper's Magazine. He titles it "The West Against Itself." The reference is to politicians like McCarran, who for short-term political gain and quick cash will liquidate the natural resources of the West, which is to say, the future of the West. Come 1950, that land grab plot has evolved. It had been to attack public lands at the extremities, starting with the BLM lands. Now they want to go for the heart, the most protected public lands, the national parks. The plan is to build dams inside national parks. There's plans ready to go to build dams in the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the North Fork of the Flathead, Kings Canyon, Mammoth Cave. And it's all going to start with a dam built in Dinosaur National Monument, which is on the border of Utah and Colorado. Once again, DeVoto exposes it. He puts it in the Saturday Evening Post, the most read magazine of its era. He titles it, "Shall We Let Them Ruin Our National Parks?" And he lets everybody know that behind all the iterations of this land grab plot is Pat McCarran. So what happens when Bernard DeVoto exposes what Pat McCarran is up to? It gets Bernard attacked, of course, by McCarran's understudy, Joe McCarthy. But where Pat McCarran is a genius, when Joe McCarthy tries to attack Bernard DeVoto on nationwide TV, he calls him
Richard DeVoto.
The audio worked. If you didn't catch that, he goes on nationwide TV and tells America they need to be scared of Richard DeVoto.
Richard DeVoto.
There it is again. But McCarthy and McCarran are not done. You can see that when McCarran gets fan mail, it comes with stickers that say, "I'm for McCarthy." McCarthy starts attacking these magazines that publish Bernard DeVoto, and he starts to get blacklisted. And this is bad for conservation because the DeVotos are the most eloquent spokespeople for conservation. It's also bad for the DeVoto family because this is their livelihood. Fortunately, Bernard has Avis. They start working together closer than ever before, brainstorming new ideas that they can write about in compensation for his getting blacklisted. Avis suggests that Bernard write about kitchen knives. He does so in Harper's Magazine. And in 1952, it gets him a fan letter from an aspiring cookbook chef living in Paris, Julia Child. Avis and Julia become best friends. Avis promises she's going to get Julia a book deal. She's going to make her a star. And it's really sweet because Julia, as she gets to know the Devotoes better, becomes a very outspoken person about public lands conservation in her own right. She calls it the public lands business. So Julia Child was not the only new fan and friend that came into the Devoto's life because of conservation. Hopefully this plays. Maybe you can help me out with this. Okay. This logger is going to tell you who this is. This is in the Bitterroot Mountains, 1954. I'll be goddamned, I never thought I'd see Adlai Stevenson here. Bernard DeVoto made a secret trip to Missoula, Montana in 1954 with Adlai Stevenson, the Democratic nominee for president in 1952 and 1956. Stevenson asked DeVoto for a field lesson in conservation, so they go up to the Bitterroot Mountains. Bernard shows Stevenson how to chain smoke. He shows him conservation. They go to rangers, grass holds the soil. Friends, this is grassroots politics. It is said that if Stevenson is president, Bernard DeVoto is going to be made the Secretary of Agriculture or the Secretary of the Interior to oversee public lands. You see Stevenson saying, yeah. But Bernard impresses on Stevenson that one of the most important reasons for public lands conservation is to protect the sources of cold, clean water upon which life in the West depends. He tries fly fishing, you see how much he likes it. But Bernard is thinking ahead, just in case. By the way, this video is making its theatrical debut right here, right now. conservation correspondence with his senator, John F. Kennedy. But that's all in the future. It's 1955. McCarthyism is bearing down on both of the DeVotos and what they want to do. How do they make Julia Child a star? How do they keep dams out of national parks? How do they do it? Friends, I wish I could tell you the answer right now, but I am out of time. I can only leave DeVoto and the Forgotten Fight to Save the Wild comes out on July 5th. I have book plates I can sign if you pre-order one. There's some postcards for pre-order. Thank you for
I was just going to remind people his book is out in a little more than a week on July 5th. So our time's getting short. I think we're going to take some audience questions. Do we have a roving mic in there?